Thank you to the sponsor of this video, LEGACYBOX. Job advertisements in the 1950s were explicitly divided into help-wanted male and help-wanted female sections in the newspaper. Men were typically offered positions in business, engineering, and trades, while women were steered towards roles in teaching, clerical work, and domestic services. This practice reinforced traditional gender roles and limited opportunities for women in the workforce. Although common at the time, it created structural barriers to economic independence and career advancement. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed employment discrimination based on sex, helping to eliminate gender-specific job listings and promote equal access. During the mid-20th century, parents were commonly advised to keep a bottle of ipecac syrup in the home to induce vomiting in case of accidental poisoning. This was considered a responsible precaution, and pediatricians often recommended it. The idea was to remove the toxic substance from the stomach before it could be absorbed into the body. However, later research revealed that inducing vomiting was not always effective and could sometimes cause more harm than good. Modern poison control centers now advise against using ipecac and instead recommend calling professionals for guidance in any poisoning emergency.
What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor? Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
Advertising in the 1950s operated with minimal oversight, allowing companies to make bold and often misleading claims about their products. Cigarette ads featured doctors endorsing specific brands, while diet products and soft drinks promised effortless weight loss. Products were marketed aggressively, often targeting women and children with unsubstantiated health benefits or exaggerated results. Regulatory agencies like the FDA and FTC had limited power to intervene at the time. Over the following decades, public awareness and health concerns led to stronger regulations and advertising standards, including truth in advertising laws and warnings on potentially harmful products. Asbestos was widely used in the 1950s due to its fire-resistant and insulating properties. It could be found in insulation, floor tiles, roofing materials, and even household appliances. At the time, the health risks associated with asbestos exposure were largely unknown to the public, and it was praised as a versatile and modern material. Unfortunately, prolonged exposure was later linked to serious health issues, such as mesothelioma and other lung diseases. Despite growing concerns, it took many years for regulations to catch up, and many buildings constructed during this era still contain asbestos today. Proper removal now requires specialized handling due to its known dangers. During the 50s, littering was a common and widely accepted practice. There were few public trash bins, and little emphasis was placed on proper waste disposal or environmental responsibility. People frequently discarded items like wrappers, bottles, and cigarette butts in streets, parks, and along highways. As consumer culture grew and packaging became more disposable, the volume of litter increased. It wasn't until later decades that organized campaigns began to shift public attitudes and promote cleaner public spaces. Today, littering is discouraged by both law and social norms, with many cities enforcing fines and public education programs. In the 1950s, lobotomies were considered a legitimate medical treatment for various mental health conditions, including depression, schizophrenia, and anxiety. Prominent physicians promoted the procedure widely, often with little regard for long-term consequences. In many cases, patients underwent the operation without fully informed consent, and it was not uncommon for lobotomies to be performed to control behavior rather than treat illness. The procedure often resulted in severe and irreversible side effects, including cognitive impairment and personality changes. Today, lobotomies are seen as a dark chapter in the history of psychiatry and are no longer considered an acceptable form of treatment. Even after child labor laws were enacted, many children in the 1950s continued to work, especially in rural areas and family-run businesses. It was common for kids to deliver newspapers, work on farms, or take summer jobs in factories or stores. This labor was often viewed as a way to instill responsibility and contribute to the family income. However, the line between helpful work and exploitative labor was not always clearly defined. Over time, stricter enforcement of labor laws and a greater emphasis on education shifted cultural norms, and child labor gradually declined in most formal industries. In the 1950s, some cosmetics and health products contained radioactive ingredients, such as radium, which at the time were believed to rejuvenate the skin and boost vitality. These products were marketed as scientifically advanced and were often quite expensive. However, the health risks associated with radiation exposure were poorly understood or ignored. Long-term use led to severe medical issues, including radiation sickness and cancer. As scientific knowledge improved, these products were removed from the market, and regulations were put into place to prevent the use of hazardous substances in personal care items. Hitchhiking was a widespread and socially accepted means of travel in the 1950s. It was especially common among young people, military personnel, and those who didn't have cars. The practice was seen as economical and often necessary, especially in areas with limited public transportation. Trust in strangers was higher, and few people considered it inherently dangerous. Over time, however, concerns about personal safety and a rise in violent crime contributed to a sharp decline in hitchhiking. Today, the practice is far less common, and in many places, it's against the law. In the 1950s, it was relatively easy for a family member to have someone committed to a mental institution, often with little legal oversight. This process was sometimes used to control or remove individuals who exhibited non-conforming behavior, especially for women. Mental health facilities were frequently overcrowded, and patients had limited rights once admitted. Many were institutionalized for years, sometimes without proper treatment or the ability to advocate for themselves. In later years, reforms were introduced to protect patient rights and ensure that mental health care was based on medical necessity rather than social convenience. Burning household garbage in backyards was a standard practice in the 1950s, especially in rural or suburban areas without regular waste collection. People disposed of paper, food waste, and even plastics and chemicals in burn barrels or pits. At the time, there was little understanding of the environmental or health risks associated with burning synthetic materials. The smoke often carried toxic substances, contributing to air pollution and potential respiratory issues. Today, burning household waste is banned or heavily regulated in many areas, and communities rely on organized waste management systems and recycling programs. In many households during the 1950s, washing out a child's mouth with soap was a commonly accepted form of punishment for swearing or lying. This practice was passed down through generations and considered a way to teach discipline and respect. However, it posed health risks, as ingesting soap can cause nausea, irritation, and other side effects. Over time, this method of discipline fell out of favor as parenting standards evolved and awareness grew about safer and more constructive ways to address behavioral issues. Today, it is widely regarded as inappropriate and potentially harmful. Therefore, it could be considered child abuse. Back in 1968, turning 18 meant you could vote, get drafted, and in most states, walk into a bar and order a drink. It certainly wasn't unusual to see high school seniors celebrating their birthday with a legal beer. In some places, even younger teens could drink beer or wine legally, while hard liquor required you to be 21. Drunk driving laws weren't strictly enforced, and as long as you could walk a straight line, most officers let you off with a warning. It wasn't until the 1980s that the legal age was raised to 21, mostly because the federal government threatened to cut highway funding for states that didn't comply. If you grew up in the 1960s or 1970s, you probably rode in the back of a pickup truck at least once. Whether you were driving home from a baseball game or just cruising down the highway with the wind in your face, it was a part of normal life. No one worried about seatbelts, so the truck bed was often full of kids. Today, most states have banned the practice, especially at speeds over 25 miles per hour. But for those who remember, it was just another great thing to love about the 1960s. It might sound unbelievable now, but in 1968, it wasn't strange for a high school student to bring a rifle to school. In more rural areas, hunting was a way of life, and plenty of teenagers kept shotguns in their trucks so they could go straight to the woods after class. Some schools even had rifle clubs, where students practiced marksmanship under a teacher's supervision. A gun rack in a truck window wasn't a reason to panic. SWAT teams were never called, and teachers didn't think twice about it. Times have certainly changed, but back then, it was just another part of growing up. In 1968, chemistry sets weren't just educational, they were also adventurous. Kids could mix real chemicals, creating explosions, toxic fumes, and even small fires right in their bedrooms. Many sets included potassium nitrate for making gunpowder, and even uranium ore for testing radiation. Mercury was also a common ingredient, and plenty of kids played with the liquid metal, rolling it around in their hands without a second thought. Parents saw these kits as a way to inspire future scientists, but over time, the risk of burns or poisoning became too great, so the dangerous chemicals were removed completely, and with that, their popularity faded. Fireworks today are tame compared to what kids had in the 1960s. Cherry bombs, M80s, and silver salutes were basically mini explosives that could take out a mailbox or blow a hole in a trash can. It wasn't just about lighting them, it was about the challenge of getting away before the blast. Some kids even used them for fishing, tossing them in the water to stun fish. Parents warned about losing fingers, but that didn't stop kids from lighting another fuse. Eventually, the government banned these high-powered fireworks, but anyone who grew up with them remembers the sheer thrill and occasional terror of setting them off. Believe it or not, there was a time when cracking open a beer while driving wasn't illegal in many states. Some people kept a cooler in the passenger seat for long road trips, and drive-through liquor stores were a common sight. Police didn't pull drivers over unless they were obviously drunk, and as long as you could handle your vehicle, having an open container wasn't a big deal. It wasn't until the 1980s that attitudes changed. Today, even holding a beer behind the wheel will get you in serious trouble, but back then, it wasn't unusual. Kids in the 60s and 70s had some wild toys, and one of the strangest was Whammo's super elastic bubble plastic. It came in a tube, and you'd squeeze out a blob, stick it on a straw, and blow it into a big, colorful plastic balloon. The problem, the stuff was packed with toxic fumes, and you could feel it the second you opened the tube. Some kids would get lightheaded from playing with it. Although it was fun, most of us knew it probably wasn't safe, so eventually it disappeared from store shelves. But if you ever played with it, you'll never forget that strong chemical smell. Before the modern movie rating system, films in 1968 had far fewer restrictions on content, and what audiences saw often depended on the theater's discretion. Hollywood still followed the remnants of the old Hays Code, but by the late 1960s, filmmakers were pushing boundaries with violence, language, and adult themes. Movies like Bonnie and Clyde and The Wild Bunch shocked viewers with their graphic shootouts, while Rosemary's Baby delivered psychological horror that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Without clear ratings, parents had no real way of knowing if a film was suitable for kids, and many young audiences ended up watching movies that would easily be rated R today. Drop-side cribs were once a must-have for parents. The design let one side slide down, making it easy to pick up a sleeping baby without waking them. For decades, these cribs were standard in homes, hospitals, and daycare centers. But over time, it became clear they weren't as safe as people thought. The sliding mechanism could fail, leading to dangerous gaps where babies got trapped. After multiple tragic accidents, they were finally banned in 2011. If you were a kid in the 60s, you probably remember mosquito trucks rolling through your neighborhoods, spraying thick clouds of DDT. And if you were like most kids, you didn't run away. You ran into the fog, laughing and playing as it filled the air. No one thought about the long-term effects back then, even though the smell alone should have been a warning. It wasn't until scientists linked DDT to cancer that it was finally banned. Today, the idea of kids chasing pesticide trucks seems crazy, but back then, it was just another summer night. There was something special about getting a cold soda from a vending machine in the 1960s. The bottles were made of thick glass, and you had to use the built-in opener to pop the cap. If you returned the empty, you got a deposit back, something that encouraged kids to collect bottles to make a little spending money. But glass breaks, and plenty of people learn that the hard way when pulling a heavy glass bottle from the vending machine, making it a liability for soda companies. Over time, vending machines switched completely over to plastic bottles and aluminum cans for safety's sake. But the switch also saved them money because plastic was cheaper to recycle and manufacture. Before bright orange tips and neon-colored plastic, toy guns looked real, sometimes too real. Cap guns popped like real gunfire, so kids loved to play cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians in the street, running around with guns that today would send a SWAT team rushing in. But back then, no one batted an eye, and police rarely overreacted. But as times changed, and real-life incidents blurred the lines between toys and weapons, realistic toys were heavily restricted. Today, it's hard to imagine a kid casually carrying one into a store, but in the 1960s, it was just another afternoon of play. Back in the day, kids used railroad tracks as an extension of the playground, walking along the rails, trying to keep their balance, or using the tracks as a shortcut to school was just part of growing up. Some would place pennies on the rails to see them get flattened, while others dared each other to cross a trestle before a train came through. You could always count on waving to the engineers and covering your ears as a train horn blasted. Today, that kind of fun is strictly off limits. Railroad companies cracked down hard on trespassing, and for a good reason. But for those who remember, it was a great adventure that added to your childhood. In the 1970s, a health scare over red dye number 2 led to the Mars company pulling red M&Ms from production, despite the fact that M&Ms never actually used that dye to begin with. It didn't matter though. Public concern was high enough that red M&Ms disappeared over the decade. Meanwhile, people were still eating plenty of other foods that contained red dye number 2, like certain soft drinks and certain cereals, before the FDA officially banned it in 1976. By the time red M&Ms made a comeback in 1987, the perception of red color in foods had shifted back to being safe. At least we hoped. Back in the 1970s, pajamas, furniture, and even baby clothes were loaded with flame retardants to prevent fires. At the time, it seemed like a great idea. Who wouldn't want some extra protection? But it turned out that these chemicals were being absorbed into our skin and were linked to serious health risks. It wasn't just clothing either. Old couches from that era still contain high levels of these now banned chemicals. Even though they meant well, the addition of flame retardants proved that sometimes safety measures may deliver an even worse outcome. Believe it or not, there was a time when a kid could walk into a store, hand the cashier a note from their parents, and buy a pack of cigarettes. No questions asked. Some kids didn't even need a note. The clerk just knew it was for mom or dad. It wasn't unusual for kids to grab a pack of smokes right alongside a candy bar and a bottle of Coke. Even cigarette vending machines were everywhere, in restaurants, bowling alleys, even gas stations. Today, that sounds completely crazy, but back then, it was just another errand to take care of for mom or dad. If you grew up in the 70s, you probably remember clackers, the toy that was as fun as it was dangerous. These two acrylic balls on a string would make a loud clack as you swung them together, and the goal was to keep them going as fast and as long as possible. The problem was, if you weren't careful, they could smack you in the face, or even worse, shatter into sharp pieces. Schools eventually banned them, but that didn't stop kids from sneaking them around. Because let's face it, once clackers were forbidden, kids wanted them even more. Cyclamates were a popular artificial sweetener found in diet sodas and low-calorie foods, but it took until 1970 for them to be banned. Scientists claimed they could cause cancer, though later studies questioned whether the risk was really as bad as originally thought. Before the ban, sodas like Tab used cyclamates to get that sweet taste, but after they were pulled, companies had to switch to saccharin. Strangely enough, many other countries never banned the substance and still allow them today.
Don't settle for some of the taste, some of the time.
In the 1970s, cigarette ads were everywhere, on TV, in magazines, and plastered across billboards. The Marlboro Man, Joe Camel, and catchy slogans like "Winston tastes good like a cigarette should" made smoking look like the ultimate cool factor. But by 1971, the US had banned cigarette ads on TV and radio, forcing tobacco companies to get creative with their marketing. They shifted to print ads, sports sponsorships, and even product placements in movies. Even though these ads are long gone from the airwaves, their influence on generations of smokers is still undeniable. Speaking of smoking, if you flew on an airplane during the 70s, you'll remember that a smoke-filled cabin was just part of the experience. The armrest ashtrays were in full use, and even though there were designated smoking and non-smoking sections, the smoke didn't exactly stay put. Flight attendants dealt with clouds of smoke, and non-smoking passengers just put up with it. The smoking ban on airplanes started small, with it being phased out on domestic flights shorter than 2 hours in 1988, before it was completely prohibited in 2000. Now lighting up on a plane is unthinkable, but those old no smoking signs are a reminder of how different things used to be. Lead-based paint was on just about every surface in the 70s, on walls, toys, and even cribs. It made colors more vibrant, and the paint lasted longer, and nobody thought twice about small children chewing on those lead-covered toys. When the serious health risks became undeniable, lead paint was finally banned in 1978, but many homes built before then still contained lead paint. Removing or mitigating it was expensive, and to this day, people still have to be cautious when renovating older homes. It's crazy to think that something so common turned out to be such a hazard. Lawn darts seemed like good, innocent backyard fun until you realized they could cause serious injuries if they hit someone. These heavy metal-tipped darts that were meant to pierce the ground caused several bad accidents, including a few fatalities. That's when parents started demanding they be banned. By the mid-1980s, they were pulled from store shelves, although many people held on to their original sets. The modern version of the game is much safer, but let's be honest, the thrill of playing lawn darts was really about dodging death. For kids growing up in the 70s, candy cigarettes were the ultimate way to feel grown up. They came in packs that looked just like real cigarette brands, and some even had a powdered sugar coating that let you puff out fake smoke. Parents didn't think much of it, even though they were basically encouraging smoking with fun and delicious candy. Eventually, concerns over promoting smoking led to bans in many places, and the packaging for candy cigarettes had to change drastically. They could no longer mimic real tobacco packs, and the word cigarettes was removed altogether. Back in the 70s, every gas station pumped leaded gasoline, and no one batted an eye. It helped cars run smoother and prevented engine knocking, but in reality, it was polluting the air and causing serious health issues. Studies linked lead exposure to developmental problems in kids, leading to a slow phase-out that started in the mid-70s. By the 1990s, leaded gas was mostly gone, and today it's hard to imagine we used to willingly pump a neurotoxin into the air. Just another example of how times have changed. Believe it or not, some high schools actually had designated smoking areas for students in the 1970s. It wasn't just the kids either. Teachers were puffing away in the teacher's lounge, and sometimes even in the classroom. It was quite common to see students lining up along a smoking wall and lighting up in between classes. By the late 80s, the smoking areas started disappearing. But for many years, smoking at school was part of the daily routine. Today, the idea of a high school smoking section seems almost unbelievable. The original Easy Bake Oven was every little girl's dream toy, because they could bake real tiny cakes. The only problem, the incandescent bulbs that did the cooking got seriously hot enough to cause burns or even melt the plastic on some models. After a while, safety concerns led to many redesigns, and modern versions shifted to a safer heating element. But for those who remember the original, there was something magical about making your own little cakes under the glow of a 100-watt bulb. It might not meet today's safety standards, but it sure made childhood sweeter. Did you know that back in 1970, there were no specific laws against identity theft? It wasn't even considered a standalone crime. If someone used your name or social security number to open an account or take out a loan, it might have been seen as fraud, but the legal system had no clear path to prosecute someone for simply pretending to be you. It took a few decades and a growing wave of personal data misuse before lawmakers finally caught on and passed targeted laws to crack down on this now common threat. In 1970, a woman could be denied a credit card simply because she wasn't married. Banks often required a husband's signature, even if the woman was fully employed and financially responsible. The thinking at the time was that men were the financial heads of the household, and women were too much of a credit risk on their own. It wasn't until 1974, with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that women gained the legal right to access credit without a husband's approval. Pirate radio was another unique feature of that era. Back then, private citizens could set up small radio transmitters and broadcast without a license, at least for a while. It wasn't until the FCC began cracking down on unlicensed broadcasts that pirate radio became illegal. Before then, people could beam their own music, messages, or opinions across town without any formal approval, and it gave rise to a rebellious underground radio culture that shaped a lot of local communities. Mercurochrome and merthiolate were household staples for decades. These brightly colored antiseptics were found in just about every medicine cabinet and were used on cuts and scrapes. What most people didn't realize at the time was that both products contained mercury, something we now know to be highly toxic. By the 1990s, the FDA declared them unsafe and yanked them from the market. But for generations, kids were painted red, and it was a badge of first aid honor. When it came to car safety, things were a lot different back in 1970. Babies could legally ride on a parent's lap in the front seat, and in many cases, there wasn't even a seatbelt involved. Car seats existed, but they weren't required by law in most states, and were often poorly designed. Parents didn't think twice about tossing a baby into the front bench seat for a quick ride to the store. It wasn't until the 1980s that child safety laws and proper restraints became standard. Freight trains rolling across the country often had unexpected passengers in the 1970s, hobos, and riding those trains wasn't always illegal. While trespassing laws did exist, enforcement was inconsistent, and it wasn't usually considered a felony. During hard times, especially the Great Depression and its aftermath, many transients took to the rails looking for work or a better life. By 1970, the practice had dwindled, but it still occurred, and the law was a lot more forgiving than it is today. Believe it or not, NFL players in the 1970s might be spotted smoking cigarettes right on the sidelines during games. Smoking wasn't just common, it was a part of the culture. Team coaches, players, even broadcasters lit up in full view of the cameras, and cigarette ads were still airing during commercial breaks. The shift away from this image took time, but by the 1980s, smoking on the field was banned, and tobacco's grip on sports had begun to fade. Selling real human skeletons for classroom use was completely acceptable during this time too, and many schools and universities purchased them without much oversight. These skeletons were often sourced from overseas, and the trade was loosely regulated at best. Eventually, ethical concerns and international laws tightened restrictions, and synthetic skeletons replaced the real thing. But for decades, countless students studied human anatomy using actual bones from unknown people around the world. One of the most controversial medical devices of the 1970s was the Dalkin Shield. This was a device marketed to women as a safe, hassle-free form of birth control. Unfortunately, it turned out to be poorly designed and caused serious infections, infertility, and even deaths. Despite warnings, it stayed on the market for years. Eventually, lawsuits and public outcry led to its removal in 1974, and it remains a cautionary tale in the history of women's health products. Tanning products of the era often contained ingredients we now know to be carcinogenic. Back then, the dangers of sun exposure were barely acknowledged, and a deep tan was considered the ultimate sign of health and beauty. So people slathered on these products without knowing they might be increasing their risk of skin cancer. Over time, regulations tightened, ingredients were banned, and public awareness shifted towards safer skincare. And finally, yes, it was completely legal to buy sticks of dynamite at the hardware store in 1970. Farmers used it to remove stumps, contractors blasted rock for construction, and anyone with a legit reason could pick some up with little more than a signature. Regulations were minimal, and safety standards were mostly left up to the user. Eventually, stricter controls were introduced, but for a long time, explosive power was just another item on the shelf next to the hammer and nails. In the 1980s, seatbelt use was more of a suggestion than a rule, and many people rode in cars completely unrestrained. Some drivers resisted wearing seatbelts because they were uncomfortable, and it was considered an infringement on personal freedom. However, studies from the late 1970s and early 1980s showed that wearing seatbelts reduced injuries and deaths in car accidents. New York became the first state to require seatbelt use in 1984, and by the early 1990s, all states except New Hampshire had a seatbelt law in place. But even after laws had been passed, only about half the population was using them on a regular basis. Not buckling up was common practice during the 1980s, but it is now strictly enforced, and hefty fines ensure compliance. Cigarette vending machines were everywhere in the 1980s, found in restaurants, gas stations, bowling alleys, and even hotel lobbies. These machines made it easy for anyone, regardless of age, to purchase cigarettes, often with no oversight. As concerns over teenage smoking grew, efforts to restrict access to these machines increased. By the 1990s, many states had begun enacting laws to remove them from public places, and the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2009 effectively banned cigarette vending machines altogether. Today, what was once a routine way to buy cigarettes is now nearly extinct, reflecting the larger decline in smoking rates and stricter regulations on tobacco sales. The 1980s were the golden age of aerosol sprays, with products like Aquanet playing a crucial role in creating the era's iconic big hair. Deodorants, air fresheners, and spray paints were also widely used, without much thought about their environmental impact. That is until a hole in the ozone layer was discovered in 1985.
And now the ozone layer. The Environmental Protection Agency formalized a plan today that this country and 23 others agreed to in Montreal in September, a plan to freeze the production and use of the chemicals believed to be damaging the ozone layer, which protects us from the sun's dangerous rays.
And scientists linked it to the use of chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, found in aerosol sprays. In 1987, an international agreement was signed, leading to the global phase-out of CFCs. And by the early 1990s, most aerosol products had switched to safer alternatives. Today, the hole in the ozone layer is healing, and you don't hear much about it, and the popular aerosol sprays of the 1980s are a thing of the past. In the 1980s, most packaged foods had little to no nutritional information, leaving consumers unaware of how much sugar, fat, or sodium they were eating. People often made food choices based on taste, and marketing, rather than any health considerations. The rise in obesity and related illnesses in the 1980s and early 1990s led to increased demand for transparency in food labeling. This led Congress to pass the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act in 1990, requiring food manufacturers to include standardized nutrition facts on most products. By 1994, the familiar black and white nutrition label became a standard feature on grocery store items, helping consumers make more informed dietary choices. Speaking of nutrition, the peanut butter sandwich was the ultimate go-to school lunch in the 1980s, packed by millions of parents without a second thought. At the time, allergies to peanuts were relatively rare, and schools had no policy restricting peanut products. However, as peanut allergies grew in the 1990s and early 2000s, the risks of severe allergic reactions became widely recognized. Schools then began implementing some safety protocols, but it eventually led to a full peanut ban in many school districts across the United States. Dodgeball was a playground and gym class favorite in the 1980s, allowing kids to test their speed, agility, and throwing skills. While many students loved the game, others dreaded it, as stronger players often targeted weaker ones, leading to complaints of bullying. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, concerns over injuries and the game's aggressive nature led many schools to ban dodgeball altogether. Some educators argued that the game encouraged physical intimidation rather than fitness, leading to it being banned from many curriculums nationwide. In the 1980s, three-wheeled all-terrain vehicles became incredibly popular for both recreational riding and utility use. Companies like Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki marketed them as fun machines, making them appeal to riders of all ages. However, they were unstable, caused by the single front wheel and high center of gravity, leading to a high number of accidents, mainly rollovers that resulted in serious injuries and deaths. As reports of accidents mounted, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission took action, leading to a voluntary agreement with manufacturers in 1988 to stop producing three-wheeled ATVs. While existing models were not recalled, production shifted entirely to more stable four-wheelers that remain the industry standard today.
When I was your age, my dad shared a beer with me, and I thought it was about the best thing in the world.
In the 1980s, it was a rite of passage for some parents to let their kids have their first taste of beer. For some, it was just one drink, while others might get an entire can. It was kind of seen as a bonding moment, with some believing it would reduce their curiosity. However, research in the 1990s and 2000s showed that early alcohol exposure increased the likelihood of drinking problems in adulthood. At the same time, laws against providing alcohol to minors became stricter, and what was once a casual tradition turned into a legal risk for beer-drinking parents. Pez dispensers were a beloved and collectible treat in the 1980s, featuring fun characters and brightly colored candies. However, those tiny colorful sweets contained artificial dyes like red dye 3 and yellow dye 5, which later became controversial due to potential health risks. Studies linked red dye 3 to cancer in lab animals, prompting the FDA to ban its use in cosmetics in 1990, though it remained legal in food, which seems crazy. Yellow dye 5 was also criticized for possibly contributing to hyperactivity in children, and it has been banned in many European countries along with California. While Pez and other candies still contain artificial coloring, increased awareness of food dye risks has led some brands to rethink the synthetic colors they add to their products. Before SUVs and minivans took over, station wagons were the family car of choice, and their spacious cargo area made perfect play and nap spaces for kids on long road trips. With seatbelts being optional, children would often stretch out in the back and get comfortable. However, as crash studies began to show dangers, car seats and seatbelt laws became more strict in the 1990s. By the mid-90s, all passengers, including those in the back, were required to wear seatbelts, bringing an end to the era of carefree road trip lounging. In the 1980s, fur coats were a status symbol, usually worn by celebrities or other fashionable wealthy women. Mink, Fox and rabbit fur coats were seen as luxurious. However, animal rights activism gained momentum later in the decade, with groups like PETA leading protests against the fur industry, and it brought widespread awareness to the issue. And by the 2000s, many fashion brands had stopped using real fur completely. Today, faux fur and other ethical alternatives have largely replaced traditional fur coats. Kids used to spend a lot of time entertaining themselves, and in the 1980s, they often did this by coming up with harmless pranks. Think prank phone calls, toilet papering houses, and even throwing eggs at homes and cars. Then came caller ID in the 1990s, making anonymous prank calls easier to track. At the same time, TPing and egging, once seen as mischievous fun, began to be classified as vandalism, leading to expensive fines and even criminal charges. And today, many homes have cameras to monitor their property, which deters pranksters even further.
People can't get over the change in me. I guess it's just that I feel so good about myself now. What happened is I went on a diet, and it worked. I took Dexatrim and I lost weight, and that really made me happy.
Dexatrim people, they not only try to lose weight, they succeed.
Dexatrim used to be one of the most popular ways to lose weight in the 1980s. It was a diet pill, promising some pretty quick weight loss results without much effort. Dexatrim's active ingredient was later linked to an increased risk of strokes, and in 2000, the FDA banned the chemical in diet pills and cold medications, leading to the original formula of Dexatrim to be banned. Although it was reformulated, the risks associated with diet pills in general have made products like Dexatrim far less popular today. Back in the 1990s, it was common to see homemade baked goods being sold at school fundraisers, church events, and even roadside stands. No one thought twice about buying a slice of homemade pie or a jar of jam from a neighbor. But over the years, stricter food safety laws have cracked down on these once simple transactions. Many states now require permits, inspections, and strict labeling for anything made in a home kitchen, while some states have passed cottage food laws, allowing small-scale sales. Selling food without the proper paperwork can lead to fines or shutdowns. Even lemonade stands run by kids have been targeted in some areas, turning what used to be an innocent way to earn a few dollars into a legal headache.
Remember the simple pleasures of being a kid. They're back.
Mom?
Now you can eat like a kid again when all you cared about was taste. Introducing new Lay's Wow Potato Chips. They taste just as good as regular Lay's, and because they're made with Olean, they're half the calories and 100% fat-free.
When Olestra hit the market in the mid-1990s, it was supposed to be a game changer. This fat substitute allowed snack foods like Wow Chips to be crispy and flavorful without the extra calories. But it didn't take long for consumers to realize there was a serious downside. The FDA required warning labels about potential problems, and many people reported unpleasant digestive issues after eating products made with Olestra. As the backlash grew, the ingredient was pulled from most products and eventually disappeared from grocery store shelves, serving as a reminder that not every miracle food is worth the risk. Before 9/11, airports had a completely different atmosphere. Friends and family could walk right up to the gate, waiting with loved ones until the last call for boarding. Tearful goodbyes happened at the jetway, and welcome home hugs were immediate. But after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, airport security changed overnight. Now, only ticketed passengers can pass through security, making those gateside reunions a thing of the past. In the 1990s, Lifesavers Wholes were introduced as a bite-sized alternative to the classic ring-shaped candy. They were basically the punch-out centers of Lifesavers, but it didn't take long for them to be pulled from the shelves. Despite being small, these tiny candies posed a serious choking hazard, especially for kids. Ironically, Lifesavers were originally designed with a hole in the middle to prevent choking, but by selling the holes, they created the very problem they were trying to avoid. The controversy surrounding Lifesavers Wholes brought more attention to the dangers of small, round candies, leading to stricter safety guidelines in the years that followed. In the 90s, backyard trampolines were a staple of childhood fun, but they were also an accident waiting to happen. Without safety nets or padding, kids would bounce too high, land wrong, or even get launched right off the trampoline. Sprains, broken bones, and concussions were just part of the experience. As injuries piled up, lawsuits followed, and trampoline manufacturers were forced to add safety features. Today, most trampolines come with nets, padded frames, and strict guidelines, and some insurance companies even refuse to cover homes if they have them. While the added safety features has likely prevented many injuries, some argue that the thrill of an old-school trampoline just isn't the same. Walking into a restaurant in the 1990s often meant choosing between smoking or non-smoking, but the reality was, no matter where you sat, the smell of cigarettes lingered in the air. Smoking sections were a common feature in diners, bars, and even fast food restaurants. But over time, health concerns led to sweeping indoor smoking bans. By the early 2000s, many states outlawed smoking in public places, making smoke-filled restaurants a thing of the past. Cabbage Patch Kids were a massive toy sensation, but in the 1990s, a special version called Snack Time Kids took things a little too far. These dolls had a motorized mouth that chewed plastic snacks, mimicking a real child eating. The problem, they didn't know when to stop. Kids quickly discovered that fingers, hair, and even clothing could get caught in the doll's powerful chewing mechanism. With no emergency stop button, the toy became a serious safety hazard. After multiple injuries, Snack Time Kids were pulled from shelves and recalled. Today, interactive toys have built-in safety features, but this incident remains one of the more infamous toy recalls of the decade. In the 1990s, paddling was still a common form of discipline in many schools. If a student misbehaved, they could be sent to the principal's office for a swat with the wooden paddle. But as attitudes towards discipline changed, states began banning corporal punishment in schools, citing concerns over physical and psychological harm. While a handful of states still allow it, the practice has largely disappeared. Today, most schools rely on detention, suspension, or counseling instead, though the debate over discipline methods continues. In the 1990s, recycling was encouraged, but it wasn't widely enforced. Many people simply threw everything into the trash, and landfills continued to grow at an alarming rate. As environmental awareness increased, cities and states began implementing strict recycling laws, requiring residents and businesses to separate recyclables from regular trash. Today, failing to recycle can lead to fines in some areas, and businesses are often required to meet recycling quotas. While these efforts have helped reduce waste, the effectiveness of recycling is still debated, especially as many items that were deemed recyclable still end up in landfills. Nestle Magic Balls were a fun treat for kids in the 1990s. They were a hollow chocolate sphere that contained small plastic toys. Similar to the European Kinder Surprise, they became an instant hit. However, the US has strict laws against embedding non-edible items inside food, citing choking hazards. As a result, Magic Balls were pulled from the shelves and replaced with something called Wonder Balls, which contained edible candy instead of toys. While they're still available in some countries, the original version remains banned in the US, and even Kinder Surprise eggs are still prohibited for the same reason. In the late 1990s, burning music to CDs was a game changer. For the first time, anyone with a computer and a CD burner could create custom playlists without relying on cassette tapes. With the rise of Napster and LimeWire, people could download songs for free and burn them to CDs, sharing them with friends or even selling them. But the music industry quickly cracked down, arguing that this practice was a form of piracy. Lawsuits were filed, and new copyright protections made it illegal to distribute burned CDs without proper licensing. While personal backups were usually allowed, unauthorized copying became a serious legal risk. Today, streaming services have made burned CDs obsolete, but the battle over digital music rights continues. This last one is a bonus, and is actually the opposite scenario from what we've been discussing. It might be hard to believe, but up until 1993, women were not allowed to wear pants on the U.S. Senate floor. It was technically an unwritten dress code that reflected outdated gender norms, with women in politics expected to wear skirts or dresses. That changed when a group of female senators challenged the rule by showing up in pantsuits. Their quiet act of defiance led to an official policy change, allowing women to wear pants in the Senate for the first time ever. Recollection Road loves to recommend LEGACYBOX because we both believe in preserving the past. If you have a cluttered closet with cherished home videos and photos that rarely see the light of day, then you need to visit LEGACYBOX.com/recollection. These irreplaceable heirlooms are rapidly fading away, and they deserve to be digitized and shared with family and friends. And right now, LEGACYBOX is offering you $9 tape transfers. The process is simple. Send in your LEGACYBOX filled with old VHS tapes, camcorder tapes, and pictures. Their team will professionally digitize everything by hand, right here in the USA. You'll get the originals returned to you, along with organized digital copies. I love LEGACYBOX because it makes all my favorite memories available anytime. I can post them on social media or pull up a slideshow on my TV, which keeps special family moments alive. Visit LEGACYBOX.com/recollection to shop their $9 tape sale. That's LEGACYBOX.com/recollection to unlock this incredible offer. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to check the description of this video for links to pick up a t-shirt and sign up for the newsletter. Also, don't forget to visit our friends at Horn & Hardart to save 10% on your next order. Visit hornandhardart.com/recollection. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club.